The viewpoints expressed on Night Fright are not necessarily those of the host, the staff, the sponsors, or the affiliate stations. Tonight's program may contain graphic themes or images. Viewer discretion is advised.
There is a time for question. There is a time for answers. There is a time to challenge. There is a time to speculate. There is a time for change. There is a time for truth. The time is now. Welcome to Night Fright, your voice in the dark for horror and conspiracy. And now your host, Brent Holland.
Showtime! Welcome to the show. I'm Brent Holland, and welcome one and all to Night Fright. As I drove into the studio tonight, there was a stillness in the air, and it's damp out there. It's a cool one, folks. It's a great night to take some time for yourself. You've earned it. Get the coffee going, get the tea going, or a beverage of choice. Settle in your most comfy chair and kick those feet back. Tonight we look at a new theory in both the JFK and Bobby Kennedy assassination from a new book called CIA Rogues and the Killing of the Kennedys, with its author and our guest tonight, Patrick Nolan. Tonight we will look at the possibility that both Lee Harvey Oswald and Sirhan were both pawns in a game of MK Ultra mind control, neither purported assassin aware that he was being manipulated by hypnosis and mind control. We will also take a look at the purveyors of that program, the CIA's very own Dick Helms, Richard Helms, James Jesus Angleton, law enforcement officers, and their possible roles in both the assassinations and cover-ups. Patrick Nolan has researched the forensic evidence in both cases and has concluded that what the real evidence shows is not what has been portrayed to the American people. Patrick Nolan's interest in forensic history began in the 1960s when he was 2 years old, by the way, folks, because just look at this guy. And the assassinations of JFK, MLK, and RFK. He is a graduate of Villanova University and Boston University, though he is not a Bruins fan, thank goodness, because they just cleaned out the Habs the other night. He was an award-winning Air Force journalist, a writer-producer at ABC News Group's W Satellite News Channel, and has taught at the Hofstra University and St. John's University in New York. It's a great pleasure to welcome Patrick Nolan to the show for the very first time, and most definitely not the last. Good evening. How are you?
Good to see you, Brent. Thanks very much. I'm doing well.
Very good. Okay, what do you say we jump in right away? Let's go to the Bobby Kennedy assassination, and we'll finish up with JFK. How's that sound? Can you tell folks a brief synopsis of what took place June 4th, 1966 at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles?
I can. If you read the book, we've got quite a bit of detail. It was June the 4th, 1968. And that was the day of the California primary, presidential primary, which is the biggest one in the U.S. And in 1968, it was the most critical, because whoever won that primary race and won the state of California had an excellent chance of going the next few weeks from then to Chicago for the big convention and winning the nomination to be the Democratic candidate for president of the United States. And that person would then, mostly was figured that person would most likely face off against Richard Nixon, who had been, as we all know, vice president under an earlier administration, Dwight Eisenhower. But the point was, people at that point in time really were upset. The war in Vietnam, we had over 500,000 troops in the country there. And the death toll was rising so rapidly that it was 25,000 were killed at that point. And as it would turn out, the war wouldn't end for another 5 years, and another 25,000 soldiers would die. So this was the midpoint, really, 68. As far as the race for the presidency was concerned, California was going to be pivotal, and we would know then who was going to be the candidate for the Democratic Party, because the sitting president, who at that point was Lyndon Johnson, had opted out in March. He said, "I'm not going to run," and he knew the polls were against him. He was getting clobbered for the war in Vietnam, but also for the war at home, meaning civil rights and anti-war protests. People would just figured he would, another 4 years of his regime would have been too dangerous. And so he saw the numbers and decided to get out and not run. But Bobby Kennedy picked up the standard a week later and decided, you know what, I think we can do it. And by June the 4th, 1968, he was ready. And he had toured the whole state. He had mostly, obviously, the young people, the minorities, the immigrants on his side. Gene McCarthy was also a peace candidate, quite a bit older. Bobby was only 42. And Gene McCarthy, a senator from Minnesota, had a very good following, so it was going to be tight. Everyone knew that. And as it turned out, Bobby was reaching people by meeting them face to face wherever he could. It's funny, McCarthy used the radio and TV, and he was able to reach people very well. That was his best medium. But at any rate, the polls opened on June 4th, and the early voting was for McCarthy, because the minorities and the immigrants and a lot of the people in the urban vote, let's say the urban vote, didn't really come in until late. And when it finally came in, that would be the deciding factor. But on the morning of June the 4th, a very important person in this whole story was a man, a 24-year-old, very young man, Sirhan B. Sirhan, who eventually is accused and convicted of the crime that the book is about, the assassination of Robert Kennedy. And my thesis is that John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy were both killed for the same reasons by the same people.
Let's go to the assassination first of Bobby Kennedy, June 4th, June 5th, 1968. Bobby Kennedy's just leaving a crowded ballroom where he said, "On to Chicago and let's win there." What happens next? Who takes him by the arm and guides him through the kitchen to his ultimate demise?
Okay. There was a guard who was there for crowd control. It was 26-year-old Thane Eugene Cesar. And some people have, written that, he well could have been one of the gunmen, or the gunman, or one of the gunmen, Sirhan obviously was seen with a gun, firing, when we get into that. But this guard also had a gun. Okay. As it turns out, he leads Kennedy from the podium area, along with Kennedy's other friends and his wife, and into a pantry-like area where they were taking a shortcut to be able to get to the Colonial Room, which was where Bobby Kennedy was going to meet with the media, and that was going to be a special time for the radio and TV and newspaper people to answer, get their answers to their questions. As they go through the shortcut through the pantry, Bobby shook hands with several of the busboys, and then looked up, and about 5 feet away, Sirhan, gun in hand, started firing. Okay. And that's why people think it's a closed case, because at that point, 70 people had crowded in and did see Sirhan with the gun firing. Okay. What they didn't see, many people didn't see, is next to Sirhan, there was a woman in a polka dot dress who had been seen earlier with Sirhan. There was a man with a white shirt, gold sweater, dark pants, who had been seen with them for the last several days at various locations. And also, there were two men on each, at the very end, facing Bobby. One had a light suit, one had a dark suit on. These two men were also seen by at least 10 witnesses during the shooting with guns in their hands, okay? It appears that one of them lunged his pistol into Bobby's back, fired twice, third shot up here, the back of the head, and then a fourth shot went through the shoulder pad. The other appeared with a newspaper to be firing into the ceiling, and all the investigators said the ceiling was completely filled with holes. Well, where did those bullets go? Those were ricochets coming down. They wounded 5 people. So who's trying to simulate Sirhan firing? The scenario was that the man shooting the ricochets would account for all those other bullets out of the Sirhan gun. Well, the experts analyzed the Sirhan gun later and found lead in the barrel. Now, lead in the barrel comes from shooting certain kinds of bullets at the firing range. Well, all that lead would have been blown out if he was actually shooting live rounds. Well, as it turns out, during the assassination, people noticed another thing. A flame shooting out, a foot-long flame. The gun with a live round doesn't shoot a foot-long flame. It only shoots like a 1-inch flame. What is this? These are blanks. Now, obviously, they loaded his gun with blanks because they wanted to make sure that the actual assassins on Bobby's rear and side weren't killed or hit. But they still had to account for those shots. So they had the ricochet man, let's call him, shooting down from the side and actually wounding 5 people. Why didn't those 5 people die? Why were the wounds so superficial? Because they were ricochets many times. Ricochet, you don't get the full impact.
These are some of the anomalies, folks, in the Bobby Kennedy assassination we're talking about. Now, Sirhan's gun holds 8 bullets. Okay? 4 shots were fired at Kennedy from behind and to his right, with the fatal bullet fired from only 1 inch away behind his ear. Eyewitnesses placed the barrel of Sirhan's gun no closer than 2 to 5 feet, not inches, and only in front of Kennedy to his left, never behind Bobby. In 1982, a Stanford audio test of newsreels revealed 10 shots. Audio expert Philip Van Praag told CNN that his analysis establishes newspaper reporter Stanislaw Pruzinski's recording as authentic and the 13 sounds electronically detected on the recording as gunshots. So in other words, according to Stanford, and I'll hold up my Stanford cup, sent to be my nephew, thank you, Tyler, who's a rocket scientist at Stanford. No kidding, folks. This guy's amazing. Anyways, I'm getting off track. I just want to tell you that. So between Stanford, they found 10 shots, and Philip Van Praag found 13. Now, from a gun that only holds 8 bullets. Isn't that amazing? So, you know, there was some other anomalies too. There was no drug or alcohol test given to Sirhan. Witnesses saw 2 guys in suits that we've just mentioned. And it goes on and on. Let me tell you about Paul Schrade, folks. He was standing directly behind Bobby Kennedy. He was only 43 at the time, and he was a member of the executive board of the United Auto Workers. And he was involved. He was the chairman of Kennedy's Campaign for Labor. Paul was shot in the head, standing only a few feet behind Bobby. This is his quote made at Sirhan's parole hearing on February 9th, only a year ago, 2016. This is his own quote, Paul Schrade's quote. The LAPD and the LADA, District Attorney, knew 2 hours after the fatal shooting of Bobby Kennedy that he was shot by a second gunman. Not just one guy, two. And they had conclusive evidence that Sirhan, Bishra Sirhan, could not and did not do it. The official records show that the prosecution at Sirhan's trial never had one witness and had no physical or ballistic evidence to prove Sirhan shot Bobby Kennedy. Evidence locked up for 20 years shows that the LAPD destroyed physical evidence and hid ballistics evidence, exonerating Sirhan, and covered up conclusive evidence that a second gunman fatally wounded Bobby Kennedy. This is part of the stuff that makes up the reality of the Bobby Kennedy assassination. Now, what I want to get into is from the book is CIA Rogues and the Killing of the Kennedys by Patrick Nolan, www.nightfrightshow.com. Just click on tonight's guest book cover, take you right to a spot where you can order the book from the comfort of your own home. Is what was controlling, what was behind Sirhan's, quote, patsy attempt, as I call them. There's two patsies in this story. We're going to be looking at Lee Harvey Oswald and hit the parallels to Sirhan in just a few minutes. But let's get into MK Ultra and what most people have believed for years, that Sirhan was under some kind of mind control / hypnosis control. Can we talk a little bit about that, which is the thesis of your book, Patrick?
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Sirhan was an immigrant from Jordan. He came over in 1957. He was 13. He was from a family of 6 children, and his mother Mary and the father came over to start a new life because of the Arab-Israeli wars that were going on in the Middle East, and they settled in Pasadena. Well, sure enough, he became very Americanized quickly. People don't know this, to as many people. They weren't a Muslim family. They were a Christian family. Okay. So the people that say he was an early Arab Muslim radical are missing the whole point. So it is odd that he was chosen, but we have evidence. Intelligence files show us that they had done surveillance on Sirhan prior to the assassination. And this file surfaced after Bobby was killed, when investigators went to LAPD and the FBI investigated. And sure enough, there was a file. Why would there be a file on Sirhan before the assassination? It was surveillance. It was what schools he went to, what his family was like. So he was under watch before. Now, one reason for this, him being under watch by the intelligence agencies, was because, quite frankly, his best friend in junior high and in high school, in college, started an SDS chapter. Well, that's Students for a Democratic Society. So this would have been in 44, 54, 60, saying 62. Starts an SDS chapter. Tried to anyway. His friend, Sirhan's friend, Walter Crowe. Well, at that time, the CIA had a program called Chaos in the U.S. where they were monitoring all anti-war activity, say in 64, 65, all the way through, and civil rights movement as well. Looking to, basically their excuse was they wanted to find out if there were ties between the demonstrators or the anti-war people and the Soviet Union. Because once they had foreign ties, then they could say, okay, this is, we could solve this problem, or they would have a right to look at it. But otherwise, they really didn't have a right to look at it because the U.S. is the FBI's domain, not the CIA's domain, the way it's set up down here. But at any rate, he was under surveillance. He was being watched because of Walter Crowe, his friend. And Walter tried to enlist him in Students for a Democratic Society. And Walter was a Marxist. In those days, many college kids considered themselves that way, mostly because they were anti-war, I think. But Sirhan refused to join. He said he was apolitical. He wasn't interested. He just wanted to get a good job, make some money. He didn't care about politics. And Walter went on to UCLA, and they parted ways. Although they kept in touch, but Sirhan went to Pasadena Community College, and he never got involved in anything really political, but that file existed, and there he was being watched. At any rate, he also, some people think that what happened was he became very involved in the occult, okay? And at the same time, he took a job as a horse groom, you know, in a horse breeding place. And there he met some characters that were involved with the mob, Frank Donarumas, and also another sinister character who we were not sure who he worked for, but Sirhan's friends have said that this man was someone to watch out for. At any rate, what happens is Sirhan becomes very involved in reading and trying to find out more about the occult. And at that point, he had a terrible accident on a horse. He was thrown from a horse and went to 7 doctors, and even then went to hypnosis experts to try and relieve the pain. The pain was in his left eye, and he ended up with stitches and all, and recovered, but the pain didn't seem to dissipate completely, and he felt that hypnosis would help. And so some people think it was there that he ended up falling into the net of a CIA program that was ongoing in that place at that time.
Let's give a little bit of the history of the MK Ultra program. Approximately, when did it start, and what was the ultimate goal that they wanted to achieve? We hear of the Manchurian Candidate, where they wanted to program somebody that would be unaware, and this is chilling, folks, that would be unaware that they're committing an assassination. So it's plausible denial to the maximum.
It started in 1950. The research started in 1950 at CIA. What they were trying to do was create a way of programming someone to commit an assassination and not remember it later. And they would give them CIA plausible denial. Plausible denial meaning the person wasn't connected to them in any way. The program didn't work, partly because it was 2 reasons. It was unreliable, and it was unpredictable. If the guy was too drugged, he wouldn't hit the target. If he wasn't drugged enough, he would recall later what happened, and you couldn't have either. The memory had to be irretrievable. The person couldn't remember. They didn't want the person to remember anything, how it had happened, who had done it, who had programmed them, and why. But they also had to be deadly accurate. So when the program was failing, this is after they had already come up with years of the 50s, the 53, 54 years of research to find the right drugs that you would need to be able to create this situation where a person could be programmed, and the right hypnosis techniques. Those two combined. They tried LSD, mescaline, marijuana. So connecting the right drug with the right hypnosis techniques and post-hypnotic suggestion, they were able to get someone to do what they wanted. But since it was not totally reliable, they said, let's have this person, this is my thesis, be the fall guy. Get blamed for it, which was the whole goal. CIA isn't involved, no one knows anyway, but the actual shooters are on the sidelines. And in both these assassinations, the actual shooters are on the sidelines. And that's what made the program work. The movie, The Manchurian Candidate, is totally different, because in that film, the depiction of the hypno-programmed person is the person who does the actual shooting. No, this is different. The people doing the actual shooting are on the sidelines, well hidden, expert marksman. The fall guy is the one who's blamed, who has the gun in hand or whatever. Now, the two assassinations are different in the sense that Sirhan had a gun in his hand, okay? And he gets blamed. I don't believe Oswald was in the 6th floor firing a rifle. They didn't need to do that there. He was seen in the lunchroom minutes before and just a minute after the assassination, sitting in the lunchroom having a Coke. Couldn't have been on the 6th floor, and they didn't have to have him firing, but they had, obviously, the sharpshooters on the sidelines in 3 different locations.
Dr. Bernard Diamond, who hypnotized Sirhan for the defense, and what he found and what his conclusions were, and Dr. Seymour Polak, who hypnotized Sirhan for the prosecution, and what his conclusions were. And what struck me in your book was the conclusions were eerily similar. I would have expected the exact opposite coming from the prosecution's desk as opposed to the defense desk, but not so. Can we talk about those two guys?
Yeah, it is interesting to note that the prosecution and the defense in that time, 1968, were using hypnosis. They would use hypnosis to take a defendant and try and find out what their motive was. You don't really see a lot of that, I don't know. But anyway, the two doctors, found similar things. They both found that Sirhan was unusually susceptible to hypnosis, and it appeared that he had been hypnotized many times before, just the way they were able to do it so quickly to him. And when he was in a hypnosis, under hypnosis, he was really under. And the post-hypnotic suggestions, they always worked. They would ask him to do something under hypnosis, and when they woke him up, they would do whatever it was, and he'd react immediately, according to his suggestion, post-hypnotic suggestion. So it was amazing. But they were befuddled when they started asking him things like, okay, under hypnosis, where was your gun? Where was your gun? And he was like, what gun? He was programmed so that he would not have any memory of the situation, the shooting, who held the gun. Looks like the gun was thrust into his hand by the woman, anyway, who had a sweater at the actual assassination. And the programming took over when he just started shooting. But under hypnosis later on did not remember. And then they said, well, okay, maybe he's making it all up. He's pretending that he's under. But they tested it so many times that they knew this guy isn't faking. He really doesn't remember. And then they brought, later on when he was sent to prison, another expert, he's from Estonia, Dr. Simpson Callas, Eduardo Simpson Callas. He studied Sirhan for 35 hours. He came away saying he was programmed. Sirhan had to have been programmed, but based on all the answers we're getting of what happened that night. And then the warden came down and said, okay, doctor, you're not going to be studying Sirhan anymore. They didn't want that out. And their excuse was because you're not studying other prisoners that way. You're only studying him. And so Dr. Simpson quit, walked out the door. He had been there 6 years. He said, I'm not going to live this way. This is a cover-up. And I think he ended up teaching in Santa Cruz,
Polka dot dress girl. And because she's a big part of this, many people feel that she may have given him the trigger, either in terms of voice recognition, if you will, or gestures or something. But she was the one to trigger him, Sirhan I'm talking about, folks, to do the deed. Can we talk about her a little bit? Because a lot of people saw this girl and she ran outside and she was screaming, we got him, we got him, we got him. And Lisa Pease told me that they found a dress, a polka dot dress, not far from the scene that night. So that's another interesting fact too. Lisa Pease, folks, renowned researcher, JFK assassination, Bobby Kennedy assassination. Find her show, www.nightfrightshow.com in the archives, or just Google Lisa Pease, Bobby Kennedy, Night Fright Show, and it'll come up.
Well, for 10 days before the assassination. Is your sound still on? Can you hear me all right? Okay. For 10 days prior to the assassination, there were nine incidents where witnesses saw her with the same description, with a girl with Sirhan who was mid-20s, shoulder-length hair, medium brown color, odd-shaped nose. They all said, one said pudgy, one said just different explanation. But it was something unique that stood out, and people saw that. But she was very, very attractive and a terrific figure. We know that if you're going to program someone and they're under hypnosis, you do need a trigger. Right? So she's been looked at as probably his handler, but also a certain thing that she would say or do could, and this is, we know this from his study of hypnosis, could trigger a post-hypnotic suggestion that would activate or motivate and make Sirhan do something, and in this case, to fire a gun. And the places they were seen were interesting. They were seen at Bobby Kennedy events, a couple of events, 2 or 3 events. And then so that everyone figures, well, the plotters were trying to establish premeditation, stalking, okay? Well, I'm sure that was part of it, and it looks like the other part of it was also testing their programming and their hypno-programming, to make sure that their subject, the patsy, was going to act on cue, or any little suggestion that whatever the trigger from this particular woman. The woman, Sirhan did say at one point in its interrogation later, I remember seeing a woman that night at the embassy room in the Ambassador Hotel before Bobby was shot, and I needed coffee, and I was going into I said, all I remember is I was so tired, and this is when the drugs were kicking in, apparently, and he said I had to have coffee, and I saw her there, and I asked her if she wanted a cup, and we shared a cup of coffee. Well, people did see them with him, and that's the girl with the polka dot dress. He said that she seemed foreign, like Arabic, And now I know that the people who came up with programming had a very close ally in the Middle East that, and they used their people, their CIA used their people, their CIA people. That was the Savak. Savak was the intelligence agency of Iran at the time, a strong ally of ours.
Under the Shah, folks. That was before 1979 revolution. Yeah, Khyber Khan.
And she could have been someone involved with that group. We don't know much more about her. I think myself that she was also programmed in a sense. They wanted her to be able to, if anything happened, and she got nailed or something, they wanted her to take the fall as well, because as she ran out, people heard her saying, "We shot him," and so the program would have either been, let's have her say that. Because you can program someone under hypnosis and drugs to say certain things at certain times, and that would have been a perfect way of showing she's involved, number one. And I think people also the plotters were afraid that maybe we could use her and have her say that and make it look like it was a Charlie Manson type murder. Now this is a year or so prior to Charlie Manson, but there were a bunch of occult type groups in California, and it'd be easy to blame one of those groups, saying that because they killed for no reason many times. I mean, they killed. They were dangerous, some of them, and it was the drugs that they were on and all of that, and some crazy people. I'm referring to Charlie Manson.
And many people saw her too. I think of Susan Serrano, and she was giving testimony, folks, under interrogation by the LAPD. And the LAPD kept hammering her and hammering her. No, you didn't see that. No, you didn't see that. And this reminds me of the Kennedy assassination too, with June Hill when she was giving her testimony, when she was being interrogated. They kept hammering at her. No, you didn't hear 3 shots. They were echoes. You're crazy. We're gonna put you in the loony bin if you don't tell the truth, and things of this nature. So all this intimidation's going on with witnesses, key witnesses, and what ends up happening is testimony gets changed, testimony gets wishy-washy, if you will, and the witnesses who are solid in the beginning end up looking like they're not quite sure, and you have to examine them. The parallels are stunning.
The JFK Assassination, the definitive book by Brent Holland. From inside the Oval Office to Daily Plaza, first-person witness accounts. Order yours right now. NightFrightShow.com.
MK Ultra in the 50s, late 50s, early 60s, in Montreal, Canada, where I grew up, there's a psychiatric hospital called the Allen Memorial. The CIA were funding a program headed by Ewan Cameron. They were using LSD, behavioral techniques, all kinds of awful things to try and get this mind control thing under the auspices that they were going to beat schizophrenia. That's the excuse that they were giving everybody for these horrible, horrible experiments they were doing. It's associated with McGill University, the Allen Memorial. It's a teaching hospital. It's better now, folks. It's out of the dark ages. Just before Cameron started his program, there was another psychiatrist that got his degree from McGill. His name is Dr. Renatus Hartogs. Okay, so now you've got MK Ultra fully established in Montreal. In the summer of 1963, Lee Harvey Oswald is spotted in Montreal, just down the street from the Allen Memorial. Why do we know this? Because a Canadian customs official spotted Lee Harvey Oswald giving out, of all things, the free Cuba pamphlets that he's noted for giving out in New Orleans. So we can establish a connection between Lee Harvey Oswald and Montreal. Fast forward, 1967. Are you ready for this, folks? Just around the corner from Lee Harvey Oswald spotted, James Earl Ray is spotted in a club there speaking with a guy by the name of Raoul, who to this day he maintains hired him to kill Martin Luther King Jr. Let's go back to Dr. Hartogs for a second. Remember I said he was the psychiatrist before Ewan Campbell? Guess who he interviewed? He gave the testimony against none other than Lee Harvey Oswald, because he interviewed Lee Harvey Oswald when Lee Harvey Oswald was around 12 years old. And that report, psychiatric report, nailed Oswald as a lone nut malcontent. True story. That's true story about Montreal. MK Ultra, the Allen Memorial, Lee Harvey Oswald, Sirhan, maybe. We don't know. There's no connection there if he made it to Montreal or not. And James Earl Ray. How weird is that? So when does coincidence stop being coincidence and become something else? So there's some connections. Can we talk a little bit about the parallels between Sirhan and Lee Harvey Oswald now? They're chilling, folks. Patrick?
Well, I was just going to add to what you said, too, about Montreal. There was a center of MK Ultra hypnosis and programming experiments, because Richard Helms, who ran the program with James Angleton, and those two men, one eventually became the head of the CIA in 1966, meaning Richard Helms, and his counterpart in counterintelligence, they worked together, was James Angleton, chief of counterintelligence. But they used Montreal because they needed a place outside the U.S. It was safer, much safer. And you're right. I mean, well, I do want to say one more thing about Sirhan and Sandra Sirhan. Just to jump back for a second, the men that interrogated the witnesses who saw that the girl with the polka dot dress was Sirhan and all that, both of those interrogators were LAPD cops who had previous lives with the CIA. They had both worked with the CIA in Latin America. Okay? And once you're in, I think you're always in. They counted on them, and they came through for them. They made sure the witnesses changed their stories, and they did. They did. The other person I was going to mention was in Montreal. Boy, wow. We know James Earl Ray was up there. Interesting story about Oswald. That's true. I know. And the Sirhan story, as far as where he was programmed, we don't know. But it very well could have been Montreal. That makes a lot of sense. To fly him up there, in 4 or 5 hours would have been no problem. Sirhan goes missing in December of 1967. He's gone for 3 months. All right, and people have written to me saying just because someone's missing for 3 months doesn't mean they were programmed. Obviously, but it is ironic that we know from CIA reports and all that a hypnoprogramming course, or not course, but regimen takes 3 months time. The New York psychiatrists have proven this. It's a 3-month deal to really get it right. He's gone for 3 months. He's gentle, polite, hardworking, honest. Before he goes away, he comes back 3 months later. Sirhan. He has trance-like states, amnesia, rapid. They saw him at various occasions. Rapid speech, irritable, depressed. Right, really wound up. He knew something was wrong with himself, and he didn't know what it was, and that's what it was. Obviously, he writes notebooks that they use as the police found notebooks that he had written. Turned out, analysts have said this stuff is written on drugs. Now, Sirhan didn't do drugs, and so and other analysts have come along and said, well, look, if he was on drugs when he wrote this, it's automatic writing. Automatic writing is when you're hypnoprogrammed and then told to write stuff. And that's what these notebooks consist of, some of it incriminating.
Yeah, and he would write RFK must die over and over and over again. It's kind of like if you've seen the movie The Shining, folks, when the character, what's his face, his character is just writing the same thing on the typewriter over and over and over, obviously going through some kind of psychosis. And, this is what...
Jack Nicholson? Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what Sirhan does. RFK must die and all this stuff, over pages of it.
Yeah, right. So it doesn't show premeditation. What it shows is programming, hypnoprogramming. So the evidence that we have for hypnoprogramming is pretty solid. The CIA contacts, they were the ones who controlled the investigation. The 2 officers in the LAPD, they were former CIA people. The military intelligence report on Sirhan before the assassination, it's another. And the third thing is, there is a CIA person who did hypnoprogramming, and even F. Lee Bailey, the lawyer, used this man one time. He used this hypnotist whose name was William J. Bryan, Dr. William J. Bryan, who was considered probably the best hypnotist in the United States, bar none. And he was kind of a psycho himself and bragged to people that he had hypnotized Sirhan. And later when reporters came to him and said, okay, what's this all about? He denied everything, obviously. He only told people that he did it when he felt that he was speaking in confidence. And then, of course, a strange thing happened to him. Here he is, 1977, and the House in select hearings on the assassinations of John Kennedy and Martin Luther King. He's called in just to testify. He's found dead. Boom, he's found dead in a hotel room in Las Vegas. So
yeah, no coincidence there. There was a whole bunch of people, Johnny Roselli, all kinds of people that were found dead. Even George de Mohrenschildt. There's a good segue right into JFK and the assassination and Lee Harvey Oswald. Can we talk about that dynamic? Because this is another dynamic that I think in your book that leads to the possibility of Lee Harvey Oswald being taken into the CIA and given some MK Ultra treatment.
Right. Two major points with Oswald that people don't talk about, and they should, because they go in the direction I'm writing. One is that he spoke fluent Russian in the service. All right, now there's only one place in the service you can learn how to speak fluent Russian the way he did, and that's at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California. And it's a place where they send soldiers that have a high aptitude in language. He happened to have it. He had it. It's a gift. He was a high school dropout, but he had that gift for language. He may even been dyslexic, but he could have the audio ability to hear, to recall, and to speak in another language. They test you very. It's a very difficult test, and he passed with flying colors, I'm sure, because he ended up speaking fluent Russian to people he knew in his assignment. Where did he learn? He didn't learn. No one saw him studying it at night, and it's a difficult language to learn. It's a different alphabet, the Russian language. It's Cyrillic. But I looked at his timeline, and it fits in perfectly with when he got out of basic. The timeline, the 9 months he would have needed to go to the language school and graduate, fits perfectly with when he left the U.S. to go to where was he assigned? A CIA base in Atsugi, Japan. So the timeline squares. He gets there. What's his job? His job is obviously to intercept Russian communications and translate it. All right, now a lot of communications is in code, but even if it's in code, it still could be in Russian. It has to be translated to English, you know. And that's what he did at the CIA base. I'm sure he was doing intercept. We intercept plane communications, planes, fighters, ships, all right, tanks, submarines, missile sites, all these communications. Now it's satellites do most of it. They pick up the signals and they send it down, whatever, Fort Meade, and they translate it. But at that point, you had CIA, Army linguists intercepting signals, translating on the spot, finding out. It wasn't just taking pictures. Everyone says, oh, the U-2 had to go up and fly around and find the missiles. They were intercepting audio tracks 24 hours a day. So that was his job. So he's already in the intelligence agency when he's working over there. They bring him back, and they had a program called, it was a fake defector program, where they would take a soldier like him and send him over to Soviet Union posing as a defector. And there, pick up more on the ground and boots on the ground. You know, they needed intelligence that they couldn't get from the U-2. They needed to get it from people like Lee. And so Lee Harvey Oswald, he gets out of the service and goes over there. How did he get out so quickly? How did he get his passport right away? How did he get the funding? You know, all these things happen without any problem.
No problem at all. And folks, when he arrives back in the United States, you think he would be taken right away by the CIA, FBI, somebody as perhaps a subversive. Oh no, not at all. He's ushered through everything, and off he goes. He goes off to New Orleans. Now, George de Mohrenschildt, folks, the background on him, he's an older fella. He's a Russian guy, but he's what's called a white Russian. What that means is that he was anti-communist. In other words, he was not for the Soviet Union whatsoever. And yet we've got Lee Oswald, according to the Warren Commission report and everybody that's portrayed him, as pro-communist. So what is this young kid doing with this older man who's an anti-communist? And you've got Lee Harvey Oswald made out to be pro-communist. Can we talk a little bit about George de Mohrenschildt's role in this?
Absolutely. He, you know, as a young intelligence operative, his role clearly was to find out what the pro-Castro Cubans were doing in Dallas and Miami, and now Dallas and New Orleans, what the pro-Castro people were doing, and the anti-Castro people. Just keeping tabs on all of them, because there was a lot of activity at that time where different elements in the government and in, intelligence agencies in the government, they wanted to take over Cuba, and they wanted to get Castro out of there. They needed people like Oswald to gather intelligence, and especially someone who had his legend was that he had defected to the Soviet Union. So it could have been very easy for the CIA to get him into Cuba under the guise of being a true defector, which he wasn't. He was a fake defector, but they figured they could get him into Cuba. But I think really, and I think Oswald wanted to go to Cuba, as an intelligence operative, because that's a real feather in your cap. But at the same time, I think that the intelligence agency was really trying to frame him at that point, make it look like he definitely wanted to get into Cuba as to be a Cuban, to join the Cuban Revolution, to make him look much more antagonistic to the United States when it came to blaming him for assassinating the president. So I think that was part of their long-range ploy, was to set up this person as a guy who his ultimate goal is to be with Fidel.
Yeah, I agree. I think he was being cheap-dipped for ease to get into Cuba. Some people speculate maybe to shoot Castro. We had Dick Helms and his programs going on back then. Or perhaps to do some kind of spying, maybe being taken into the inner circle of Castro and relay information back. There's all kinds of potential. Once you get an operative into a place like that, you can pretty much place him anywhere. And if he looks like he's pro-communist and he's got the history of already being in the Soviet Union, You know, it's kind of, like you said, a feather in his cap. Now, what's interesting is Lee Harvey Oswald's actions after the assassination. Can we talk a little bit about that, how he makes his way to the Texas Theater, what happens at the Texas Theater, and why you think that he was under hypnosis as well, that he had been programmed, some of the traits he displayed?
I think that Lee Harvey Oswald was programmed and had undergone hypnoprogramming even when he was in Russia. And we can tell because of there are so many points where he wrote and said different things where even the officials over there that have said, this guy sounds like he's programmed. He's been programmed. His statement, for saying he wanted to become a member of the Soviet Union, a citizen of the Soviet Union and all that, and the way he wrote it up, it was written for him, and he memorized it. And programming allows you to, if you really program the way they did it, they could have you say things that you didn't even remember later, and you'd be saying them as if you were a college professor. And that's what he sounded like many times. This is a high school dropout. So anyway, back in Dallas, his handler was George de Mohrenschildt. George de Mohrenschildt had been an intelligence agent during World War II, and his job was to make sure that Oswald was where he was supposed to be and doing what he was supposed to be doing, and they became very close friends. Well, here you have, we know this guy was in intelligence, and you have Lee. People think is a loser, an oddhead, and he wasn't at all. All his friends said he was meek, a quiet intellectual. He read all the time, that kind of guy. Nonviolent, even. But so with George de Mohrenschildt, that's a very, very interesting story, because when he was tracked down during the House Select Committee hearings, in '77 or so, in Florida, they were hot on him, and they really wanted to know, you were close to Oswald, you've got to talk to us. And he told two investigators that he would. And then when the point came, the day came, he was found dead in his house, gunshot wound to the mouth, right? His wife thinks that he was murdered because he had no signs of, inclination toward that kind of end. And there is someone that it's in my book who has a history of silencing people, that kind of thing. And we can't speculate and draw a direct line to this person, but if you read it, you can see there's so many people that ended up exactly that way, and it was to cover up the crimes that they had committed.
I just want to talk about one last coincidence, folks. There was a fellow by the name of James Braden in 1963 in Dealey Plaza. Just at the time that Kennedy was assassinated, he was arrested lurking in something called the Daltex building, which is just adjacent to the school book depository where many people felt that Lee Harvey Oswald was. This fellow, James Braden, as it turns out, was mafia connected. They arrested him, they questioned him. He said he was, get this folks, he was in the Daltex building looking for a telephone, no cell phones, right? 1963. Looking for a telephone to call his mother because of the assassination. He was such a good guy, he wanted to call his mother and let her know right away. So, fast forward 5 years. Just outside the Ambassador Hotel, not far, Bobby Kennedy's lying in his own blood. Guess who else is picked up for questioning? James Braden, same guy. Coincidence? I'll let you guys decide. Folks, our guest tonight, Patrick Nolan, the book I urge you all to get. This is going to put a lot of pieces together for a lot of people. It's called CIA Rogues and the Killing of the Kennedys. Patrick, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show tonight, and great book. Great research, by the way, my friend.
Terrific. Thanks for your help, Brent.
Thank you, and don't be a stranger. We'll talk again. We'll talk about some other subjects and great books that you've written as well. I'll get in touch with you off air.
Anytime. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I'm Brent Holland from Night Fright. Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next time.
You're listening to Night Fright and your host, Brent Holland. The time is now. Your voice in the dark for paranormal and conspiracy.
The JFK Assassination, the definitive book by Brent Holland. From inside the Oval Office to Dealey Plaza, first-person witness accounts. Order yours right now, nightfrightshow.com.